Hello, welcome to another episode of Global Pause Rethink the Future. So in today's podcast, I want to talk about community and the way we can engender that. So we're going to be looking as to whether or not we in actual fact have one. We can say that we do share community, and if so, if we don't, then why? And if we don't, then how can we potentialise the possibility for it? Okay, so that's really what we're going to be covering off. So we are market orientated. So we are always focused on an end for ourselves, so securing our lives, because we focus on the ideal of independence. So when you're looking at what underwrites our interaction with other people, that it's the preeminent good of our time. So I always talk about this, that we are marginal in the sense that we are a means towards the end that we presuppose. And so if we are marginal, and so we give marginally, so everything that we do marginally. So we give, we receive marginally, everything is not whole, as it were. So how can I say that? And what's the context as far as the world that you share with other people? So the sense of community that you would share. So if you're always reserving something of yourself whereby that you're never giving freely, then that conservation is means to say that you give marginally. You give so you may receive. So we create the circuit for ourselves because the circuit goes through other people, okay? So, being market orientated presupposes that our relationality is defined by want. And so but what underwrites that, like I keep on saying, is the preeminent good of our time. So the interpersonal, or what we consider to be interpersonal exchanges, obviously has the unavowed autism or unavowed utopianism that we're beholden to, because we practice intrapersonal exchanges when the preeminent good of time is what we focus on. So it doesn't matter where we are in our life, whether or not we are labouring or we're an end, and we always presuppose that. But the thing about it is that circuit, that kind of feedback loop upon yourself, because it's underwritten by really the claim of removing the claim. So you're about embodying independence, and so therefore you would emulate sovereignty, or our understanding of what constitutes sovereignty in that regards. So you're really creating these kind of circuits that go through people. If you're in the market and any interaction that you have with people, it's just the way how that they kind of circle through, because the underwriter is the good of your time. We're talking about like everyday interactions. We're talking about market dynamics, because that's the average relationality that you share with people. If we're talking about community, and this is so, where does community exist in that regards? Because think of if community is only supplementary to the securing of the time that you have in order to belong to a community, then it's obviously subordinate to that preeminent good. So I always talk about this, that so in that regards, that the sense of community that you have is a supplement. It's just added on. Okay, so, and it doesn't matter whether or not it's religious or anything else like that. If you have secured the time in order to go to a mosque or whatever the case may be, to have the sense of community with other worshippers in that regards, well, you've secured your time in order to do so. The issue here is that you're not potentialising community in the mean of your existence, as it were. So when you're looking at the mean, and it's literally through the acts that would demonstrate that community that not only surpasses the supplementary way that it's given, but then also the way how you share and the way how you would define your sense of community. What would underwrite that sense of community? So if we're look outside the context of community that's supplementary to the preeminent good of your time, and then consider our sense of community in the mean of our existence, so our everydayness. Well, obviously we have. If you can say that you have a sense of community when you relate to each other through your wants? Okay, that's the question that has to be asked. I mean, is that possible? People can get involved with causes, and so what they're doing is that they're potentialising their time in a way that they're sharing in a specific cause, and so therefore, but that is circumscribed within the overall context, and so it still acts like a supplement because you're not potentialising the mean of your existence. All right, so if you're looking at potentialising the mean of your existence, then you've got to look at the way that you're a means towards the end that you presuppose. You've got to look at the mean. All right, the mean. What does the mean mean? It means the convention. It means the habitualisation. It means the given that we accept for ourselves. Okay, so if you don't potentialise the mean, then any sense of community that you share is always going to be supplementary or subordinate to the preeminent good that you're always focused on, because you're not potentialising anything beyond the givenness of that. So in the context of our world, our being market orientated, then the question is that do we share community? Can we say that when we relate to each other through our wants? Okay, because this is, maybe it's a provocation to think about it. Maybe you can say, think of the nature of what that means when you're just relating to each other through your wants. It means to say that the person that is serving you in that relationality, it's a means towards the end, because what underwrites even the relationality is the preeminent good of your time. So you might subordinate a person for the good of your want, but then you also are subordinating them for the good of the preeminent good of your time. So it's all so not only are you externalizing for the sake of the good of your time, but then also because they're a means towards the end that you presuppose, you're also externalizing them further. So that externalization, as it were. So if you accept that, let's just think of what that means. Just think of your everydayness. All right, just think of everydayness. This is where you focus on how habitual our behaviours and the givenness of our way of life and the way how we to and fro and the way and our activity, and consider that and that relationality. Can you say that that's community? So why is it? This is the point. Why is it that the only sense of community that you have is when there's somehow some kind of crisis, where everybody bonds together to either. So whether or not it's pathetic with humans is that if it's in war, then obviously you get together in order to fight an enemy, and that's your sense of community. But then in peacetime, you just go about your everydayness. So here the classic example here is that, So if that is the only way that we have a sense of is either through a crisis, so whether or not it's a crisis as far as like our own doing, whether it's an ecological one, so it may be a flood or something like that, or any form of natural disaster in inverted commas, then you have communities that come together because what they're doing is that they're addressing something in time, and once they address that, then they fall back into the same pattern. But then what they do is that they come together for the preservation of maybe of the community that's threatened from whatever is threatening it. So the issue here is that can we envisage the same kind of coming together, but that's orientated towards the creation of a way of life, rather than only coming together in the face of something that makes people have a sense of shared fate, as it were. All right. So once again, if our context is to be market orientated, can we say that we have a sense of community? All right. So you share spatiality, as it were, with people maybe that you live in the same area. And maybe, through school, then there's, relations are made, as it were, or maybe see sports clubs. But like again, if it's a sports club or any form of hobby or pastime, it's like I said, it's a supplementary or subordinate. You're not temporalising, or you're not potentialising the mean of existence. Because if you potentialise the mean of existence as far as a sense of community, then what happens when you do that? Well, that would mean to say that you would be really looking at the way how you give yourself and the way how you receive yourself in that sociality, in the relation that you engender through your activity. Okay, so what underwrites our sense of community now? Obviously, we're a means towards the end, and so we're marginal, like I said, in the way that we give and the way we receive ourselves. So how do you potentialise the marginality that we accept for ourselves in a way where you're going to potential that marginality, but potentialise it in a way that you are going to engender something from that marginality? Okay, that over time, with iteration, especially if you're doing with other people, and this is where the sense of community is engendered when you're orientated towards the same thing as other people, and then you're de-emphasising the marginality and you're emphasising the indivisibility. Now, what happens when you do that? What kind of community do you share? Now, it neither becomes supplementary in the sense that you've secured a supplement of time in order for you to have a sense of that, because the meaning of your existence has been potentialised. So when you're looking at community and the potential for community on the planet, what is the way, if you're going to frame, say, a praxis for people to put into play now, all right, so irrespective of where you are on the planet, so think of what is our way of life. If you accept that we are marginal in the way that we give ourselves towards an end that we presuppose, then can you see that the way how you're going to have a sense of community is by undoing that? Now, if you can understand the marginality, and that marginality compromises us and the ways how that we give ourselves towards life, then what that understanding opens up is a way that you can potentialise community beyond the impasse that ensues as a result of that. Because the thing about it is that the impasse is the acquisitive mimesis that is generated when the poverty of relating is reduced into want, and you try to overcome that through sharing yourself. You want to share yourself, but the way how you can share yourself is through the legitimised activity of that mean, which is consumption. So when you're looking at surpassing a way of life and surpassing a consumerist way of life and looking at zero growth. All right, zero growth means maybe the predominance of economic activity for no other reason other than economic activity. That's not to say that you're going to flourish or grow in areas that are outside the way of capturing that growth to monetize it and to put it, run it into statistics, and for it to somehow to be at the behest of the apparatus of the state as far as its management goes. Because if you're talking about a cultural dynamic, it's a cultural dynamic. It can't be managed in the way that managerialism would presuppose in that regards, because you're literally looking at the way how you embody the ethos, the spirit of a people. Now, the spirit of the people, how you get taught that? Well, you literally do get taught that. You emulate that and you demonstrate that. It's not through rote or whatever. It's through the acts that demonstrate the culture that you that you're beholden to, that you're immersed in, and that you demonstrate, and then the principles that basically that you adhere to, and the order basically that you aspire to as well. So if we talk about the aspiration of an order, well, you're going from want to creativity. That's essentially what the threshold moves from. It moves from one to the other. So, and then, because then what you're doing is that if you're leaving behind the relation of want to potentialise creativity, and literally your acts are what creates the sense of community, well, then you have this ownership of it in a way where you don't have it when the world is just given and you're a consumer of life. So I like to think that if we're looking at possibilities for life on the planet, the best way to look at the potential for that is to look at, like I always keep on saying, it's to do with our time. It's to do with the means and continuum that we presuppose when we think that we're orientated towards life. Now, if everybody is, through their questioning, understands that we're grappling with a spiritual disease, and in their own way they can approach it, there is to a certain degree a common denominator that would run through any kind of orientation towards addressing the spiritual disease that we're grappling with. And like I presuppose that it's essentially just the marginal way that we're beholden to an undervalued utopianism. We give marginally and we receive marginally, and so life is given marginally, and because we receive it and give it marginally. So, if you want life to flourish, How do you make life flourish? Well, you have to give yourself fully. You have to receive yourself fully. And you have to have the openness to allow that. And that's the strength of the culture that you engender through your acts. It's as simple as that. But if you ground it in the understanding that it's just to do with our temporality, and it's to do with nothing else other than that, then it doesn't matter where you are or what tradition that you work off. You can basically put into play the understanding within the context that you find yourself in order to potentialize the place with other people that you share, whereby you're potentializing the mean of your existence. Okay, you're not going off and having somebody sermonize to you about God, say, for instance, or maybe if you're secular, I don't know where you go. You would go and you consume. You go to the temple of consumption, I suppose, don't you? So you go to those places, or you go to spiritual kind of retreats if you're like New Agey or whatever, or you go to all these kind of self-help things. Anything that relates to kind of reflecting upon you as a person. You come together with other people that all share towards, trying to potentialize their lives. But if it's all individualistic in the pursuit of, well, how are you potentializing a common surpassing where we share with other people? And more importantly, what's underwriting the orientation towards these things? Are you really looking at what's the underlying cause of the spiritual disease that we're beholden to? Because I always say that if, we're beholden to an undervalued utopianism and our lives are spiritual, irrespective of whether or not you're focused on wealth in inverted commas or you're focused on, say, a spiritual pursuit of knowledge or of gnosis, as it were, it matters little. It matters little as far as the orientation towards if it's not demonstrated relationally. And if divinity is in between, well, it's literally in between. It's the portent. The culture exists in the excluded middle, because that's where your times meet. That's where they intersect. So how do you create a resonance and that coherence of that order that I talk about if you're only always orientating towards a pursuit that very much is individualistic and solipsism? It's like a form of solipsism, it's a form of autism, it's still an intrapersonal exchange rather than an interpersonal, as it were. So I don't know. Then it becomes, well, it's not just community in the sense that I belong to a community as far as the aspiration towards a new way of doing things. But if that aspiration is not crystallized literally into a new way of doing things, but then you step back from that and you think, okay, well, like around the planet, there's so much aspiration, especially with COVID, it's kind of brought to the fore. You have all this narrative around awakening, but what are you awakening to? What is it that that you can do if you're still beholden to kind of a narrative of somehow that the world is Maya, as it were, it's an illusion. And that the only thing that you're doing is pulling back the curtain to realise it. Are you actually really looking at it enough to know that the way how that you create it, that you are if you're beholden to an undervalued utopianism, then you, through your securing of that idol that you suppose for yourself, the counterpart to that is the dystopian. You potentialise a dystopia as well, because it will use the pretext of the security that you presuppose for yourself in order to act on your behalf or your stead, because the legitimization here is a security that you presuppose when you're orientated towards the end by making yourself a means to secure it. So if you never look at if we're marginal, then we're marginal, and then through our marginality we're compromised, okay? Now, what does it mean to be compromised? It means to be compromised in a way of life where you feel that you're stuck in a holding pattern and you can't get out of it. And then you'll compromise yourself in so many different ways. And so therefore you give and you receive marginally. Everything's kind of like a little bit half-assed, as it were. So how do you have the knowledge of what you're doing where you have that faith? Right, the faith in the knowing of what it is that you're doing, and especially if you've got other people that are doing the same thing, okay? This is the most important thing, because if everybody shares it, but everybody shares the understanding and they know exactly what they're doing. So if you're talking about marginality to indivisibility and how that kind of, how you're potentialising that and you understand that, and not only do you understand it, but somebody else does, then you've got that commonality that runs through what you do. If you're looking at the same thing, if you're going, you understand that our relationality is based on want, we need to potentialise it to creativity. If you both share that, then you understand exactly the praxis and how what you do, how it potentialises creativity. When you understand the way how that sense of community is supplementary to the preeminent good of time that you secure for yourself, and through you potentialising your time beyond the economic good, you are literally going to temporalise place for a common surpassing. If you do that enough and enough, what you're doing is you literally are potentialising community in the mean of your existence, whereby you're removing the anxiety associated with the future because it's no longer uncertain, because you have faith in what you're doing. Right? You have the commonality of that knowing with other people. And this is the only thing that I, like everything that I say, I'm just a no one, but I know that the way how you, if you frame it and the way how I frame it, it doesn't matter where you are. Doesn't matter where you are on the face of the planet and what tradition that you come from, you can utilise it in the same way. It's this, all you're doing is you're potentialising it, say, within a specific identity group, but then you're going to run up to the threshold of the other. And so you have to potentialise that because it's worth nothing if it only runs up to you're only presupposed to do it with people that are like, all right, but because you're just really, you're doing it to yourself. So you have to potentialise right up to the threshold. So in that manner, like certain kind of religious groups can probably have a better understanding of doing it compared to, because then at least they have the community that's there rather than secular, where if we're just all marker beans and we're amorphous blobs and there's no kind of commonality other than our way of life and consumerism, nobody's orientated towards a greater good than themselves other than themselves. Well, there's not a kind of a hub that you can leverage off in order to potentialise this. I mean, you can and you can't, it just depends. But I presuppose that there's probably more potential within a religious community specifically or spiritual communities because they are orientated towards a greater good. But that's not necessarily beholden to it. Anyway, I just thought that, we talk about community, but really, do we have any of it? This is the thing. Do we actually have it when the relationality is based on want? And I just feel that we don't. And if we do, it's like marginal. And so if we're looking at a new way of doing things, when we want to potentialise a new way of life and a new way of life that we can bequeath to future generations, whereby we literally are reconciling our differences. That's essentially what I presuppose anyway. Till next time.